something interesting is going on in South Africa. You see, South Africa is one of the few African countries that has a mix of white and black in its population, with the blacks as the majority. While both sides have been relatively living in peace since the apartheid ended, the US President, Donald Trump's executive order in February has changed everything. Not only has the relationship between the US and South Africa become strained, recent reports reveal that almost 70,000 white South Africans want to leave the country. According to them, they are being persecuted by the racist laws of the black South African government. The question is, are they truly being persecuted? Will they truly leave South Africa? And will the US accept them with open arms? Let's find out. In early February, the Trump administration accused the South African government of allowing violent attacks on white Afrikaner farmers and introducing a land expropriation law that enables it to seize ethnic minority Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation. And from his benevolent heart, the US president decided to offer Afrikaners who are supposedly victims of unjust racial discrimination refugee status in the US. Specifically, the order directed Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem to prioritize humanitarian relief to Afrikaners who are victims of unjust racial discrimination and resettle them in the US under the refugee program. Currently, almost 70,000 out of the 2.7 million Afrikaners in South Africa have decided to jump on Trump's offer. This was announced by the United States Embassy in South Africa last Thursday. According to the statement released, the US Embassy in South Africa has received a list of more than 67,000 people interested in refugee status in the US under President Donald Trump's plan to relocate members of a white minority group he claims are victims of racial discrimination by their black-led government. The list was given to the embassy by the South African Chamber of Commerce in the US, which said it became a point of contact for white South Africans asking about the program announced by the Trump administration last month. Now, while an official at the US Embassy in the South African capital, Pretoria, confirmed receipt of the list of names from the South African Chamber of Commerce in the US, he didn't give any more detail. The president of the chamber revealed that most of the people who registered were people between 25 and 45 years old and have children. He also revealed that his organization had been inundated with requests for more information since Trump's order. And as a result of the requests, they had contacted the State Department and the embassy in Pretoria to indicate that we would like them to make a channel available for South Africans that would like to get more information and register for refugee status. However, no response has been given by the United States. According to Neil Diamond, it is only US authorities that can officially register applications for resettlement in the US. This simply means that even though those 70,000 people have indicated their interest in leaving South Africa to the US has not yet given any response regarding their request. So here is a very big question. Was the US president truly interested in granting white South Africans a refugee status in the US? You see, the central core of Trump's policy is putting America first. And as part of his policy, President Trump has been quite stringent regarding immigration and refugee laws. Not only did Trump exclude all 54 African countries from the US visa-free program, he has also suspended programs that buy flights for refugees and cut off aid to the groups that help them resettle in the US. So, accepting refugees from South Africa actually goes against Trump's larger policy to halt the US refugee resettlement program. Right now, it is not exactly clear if Trump would accept these almost 70,000 white South Africans. What do you think Trump would do? Now, did you know that the same group that has been criticizing the land reform also rejected Trump's offer? You see, before Trump became involved, several groups representing South Africa's white minority, commonly known as Afrikaners, had been criticizing the law. Two of the most prominent of these groups are AfriForum and the Solidarity Trade Union. They have opposed the law, arguing that it will target land owned by whites who have worked to develop that land for years. They also contend that an equally contentious language law recently passed seeks to remove or limit the use of Afrikaans in schools. Additionally, they have often criticized South Africa's affirmative action policies in business, which promote the interests of black individuals as racist laws. This government is allowing a certain section of the population to be targeted, said AfriForum's Creel, who thanked Trump for raising the case of Afrikaners. Now, what is not popularly known is the fact that AfriForum has been promoting white genocide conspiracy theories while also lobbying on behalf of Elon Musk's business interests for years. Their campaigns and lobbies caught Trump's attention during his first term when they claimed that white farmers in South Africa were being murdered for political ends and to seize their land. This was why in 2018, Trump tweeted that he had directed his Secretary of State to closely study the South Africa land and farm seizures and expropriations and the large-scale killing of farmers. Perhaps this is why Southern Poverty Law Center, a civil rights organization in South Africa, has described AfriForum's leaders as white supremacists in suits and ties. Interestingly, Musk, who was raised in apartheid South Africa and is now a member of Trump's inner circle as head of the Department of Government Efficiency, has echoed claims portraying Afrikaner farmers as victims of racist murders and suggesting that a genocide against whites is imminent. However, reports have proven Musk and AfriForum wrong. The fact is that Musk has just leveraged that false narrative to challenge affirmative action laws that conflict with attempts to sell his Starlink satellite network in South Africa. In case you are not aware, South Africa has refused to give Starlink a license because he refused to adhere to the country's requirements. You see, in a bid to uplift Black South Africans who have been oppressed as a result of apartheid, the government has made it a requirement that major business deals in the country should include Black investors. Musk has, however, rejected the requirement that foreign investors in the country's telecom sector provide 30% of the equity in the South African part of the enterprise to Black-owned businesses. He tried lobbying the government to exempt Starlink from the deal, and when that didn't work, he decided to accuse the government of openly racist ownership laws. Meanwhile, AfriForum has been campaigning on Musk's behalf by claiming that Starlink is being prevented from doing business in South Africa because it is too white and is subject to strict race-based criteria. Musk and the Afrikaner rights group have both sought to turn history on its head by linking the killing of white farmers, land redistribution laws, and affirmative action programs into a common narrative of state-sponsored persecution of racial minorities by the ruling African National Congress. It would interest you to know that AfriForum has called apartheid a so-called historical injustice. Imagine that. Its chief executive, Callie Creel, also said that apartheid was not a crime against humanity because not enough people were killed during the more than 4 decades of white minority rule. Imagine that as well. In May 2018, Creel and his deputy, Ernst Roetz, traveled to the U.S. to lobby the Trump administration in wake of the ANC's decision to redistribute land and to highlight what AfriForum called the persecution of South Africa's minorities. The pair exploited South Africa's high murder rate, including of white farmers, to characterize the killings of Afrikaner landowners as racially targeted. They also played on the legacy of President Robert Mugabe in neighboring Zimbabwe, who unleashed violence against white landowners in the early 2000s to prop up his unpopular regime by redistributing land. But the fact is that the deaths of South African white farmers are mostly the result of the country's high crime rate rather than political targeting by the government. No farmers who have been murdered have then had their land confiscated. In September 2024, as Musk's dispute with the South African government over Starlink ratcheted up, AfriForum launched a campaign on his behalf that claimed Black empowerment laws were leaving white farmers without communications and vulnerable to attack by keeping the satellite network out of South Africa. By prohibiting Starlink from operating in South Africa because of racist criteria, the government is depriving rural communities of a reliable alternative that may save lives, it said. The statement ends with, "Stop the racism and fight together with AfriForum." Now, if the white minority in South Africa is truly being persecuted, why did they reject Trump's offer? Surely, it would be better to be refugees in the US, where they will not be persecuted, than to be in South Africa where they are being persecuted, right? But they rejected it. According to AfriForum CEO Callie Creel, emigration only offers an opportunity for Afrikaners who are willing to risk potentially sacrificing their descendants' cultural identity as Afrikaners. The price for that is simply too high. Separately, the Solidarity Movement, which includes AfriForum and Solidarity Trade Union, and claims it represents about 600,000 Afrikaner families and 2 million individuals, expressed commitment to South Africa. We may disagree with the ANC, but we love our country. As in any community, there are individuals who wish to emigrate, but expatriation of Afrikaners as refugees is not a solution for us, the movement said. Representatives of Orania, an Afrikaner-only enclave in the heart of the country, also rejected Trump's offer. Afrikaners do not want to be refugees. We love and are committed to our homeland, Orania said. Clearly, these people would not want to leave because they are not in any way persecuted. If they leave, they will never get access to the privileges and wealth that they enjoy in South Africa. But here is an interesting thought. Trump and AfriForum say that white minorities are being persecuted, which is false, but where were they when Black Africans were actually persecuted? But besides this, how can they claim to be persecuted when the whites in South Africa remain the most economically privileged group in the country? In 1950, the Population Registration Act classified all South Africans as either Bantu, which means Black Africans, colored, which means those of mixed races, or white. But one of the most significant acts in terms of forming the basis of the apartheid system was the Group Areas Act of 1950. It established residential and business sections in urban areas for each race, and members of other races were barred from living, operating businesses, or owning land in them. This led to thousands of coloreds, blacks, and Indians being removed from areas classified for white occupation. In practice, this act and two others in 1954 and 1955, which became known collectively as the Land Acts. The end result was that 80% of South Africa's land was set aside for the white minority. To help enforce the segregation of the races and prevent blacks from encroaching on white areas, the government strengthened the existing pass laws, which required non-whites to carry documents authorizing their presence in restricted areas. In 1958, Hendrik Verwoerd became the Prime Minister of South Africa, and he decided to refine the apartheid system into what he called a separate development. Under this so-called development, the South African government established the Promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act of 1959, which created 10 Bantu homelands. The purpose of this legislation was to separate Black South Africans from each other and enable the government to claim that there was no Black majority, thereby reducing the possibility that Black people would unify into one nationalist organization. But that was not all. In one of the most inhumane and devastating aspects of apartheid, the government forcibly removed Black South Africans from rural areas designated as white to the homelands and sold their land at low prices to white farmers. According to the reports, more than 3.5 million people were forcibly removed from their homes and deposited in the Bantustans, where they were plunged into poverty and hopelessness from 1961 to 1994. Meanwhile, while all this was going on, the international community watched on without doing anything to stop this gross human rights abuse. Isn't it interesting that a law that is supposed to rectify this injustice suffered by Black South Africans is now termed an act to oppress white South Africans? The world watched on and did nothing as Black Africans were oppressed and moved from their homes. But just the mention of a law that has not even been implemented and doesn't even have anything to do with confiscating land from the whites has seen the likes of the US standing up to supposedly fight for injustice. This is insane. However, in South Africa, people began to stand up and mount opposition and resistance to this system. Prominent among them was Nelson Mandela, who started South Africa's first law firm and was a member of a group that agitated for the civil rights of Black South Africans known as the African National Congress. At first, Mandela and his fellow activists used non-violent tactics like strikes and demonstrations to protest apartheid. For instance, in 1952, they encouraged Black South Africans to actively violate the law by burning their identification pass and refusing to carry it, or violating curfews. This resulted in the arrest of more than 8,000 people, including Mandela. This defiance campaign, carried out by Mandela and his crew, catapulted the ANC's agenda and Mandela into the public eye, as they continued to agitate for black rights. After serving his sentence, Mandela continued to lead protests against the government, and in 1956, he, along with 155 others, was tried for treason. At the time Mandela was serving his prison sentence in 1960, the police opened fire on a group of unarmed black people associated with the Pan-African Congress, PAC, an offshoot of the ANC in the black township of Sharpeville. The group arrived at the police station without passes, inviting arrest as an act of resistance. But instead of just arresting them, the police opened fire, leading to the death of at least 67 people, and more than 180 people sustained injuries. After Mandela was acquitted in 1961, he and the other resistance leaders were convinced that armed resistance, and not peaceful ones, was the only way to end apartheid. So, in 1962, Mandela left the country to receive military training and gain support for the cause. Unfortunately, he was arrested and convicted soon after his return for leaving the country without a permit. And while in prison, the police discovered documents related to Mandela's plan for guerrilla warfare, and so he and his allies were charged with sabotage. It was this third arrest that led to what is now called the Rivonia trial, which changed South Africa forever. Mandela and his fellow defendants Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and 7 other anti-apartheid activists were certain that they would be convicted and most likely executed. So they decided to go out blazing, turning the trial into a statement, publicizing their anti-apartheid struggle, and challenging the legal system that oppressed black South Africans. However, Mandela was still sentenced to prison, where he spent 27 years. It wasn't until after he was released and won the first multiracial democratic election in South Africa on April 27, 1994, that apartheid officially ended in South Africa. However, it is quite unfortunate that although the regime ended, some of the policies did not end with it. You see, in the aftermath of the apartheid era, most land was left in the hands of the white elite due to the ANC's resistance to large-scale land transfers. The party had originally promised better housing, schools, and other services for the poor and underserved black communities. But then, once elected, party leaders pursued policies to attract and maintain international investment. ANC leadership were apparently unwilling to pursue any policy that might be considered radical by international investors, including those that might privilege colored and black communities. This was in response to a large decline in economic investment and support from major Western powers during the apartheid years. Between 1994 and 2004, the ANC funded nearly 2 million new homes for black South Africans, but the housing was developed within the existing townships, reinforcing the segregated geographies established under apartheid. People in these settlements do not legally own the land they live on, have little access to public services and utilities, and often endure high costs and travel times to commute to the city for jobs that pay less than $15 a day. In 1994, there were around 300 townships and informal slums in the country. Today, there are nearly 2,700. Stark inequality remains between coastal neighborhoods in cities like Cape Town and Durban, and the townships further inland. In Cape Town, the 6th most segregated city in South Africa, 60% of the population lives in townships where public services are limited, schools and healthcare are severely underfunded, and jobs are scarce. As of 2019, South Africa's black population was over 75%, with only 9% white. Yet, the number of white South Africans earning more than $60,000 a year is 20 times higher than the number of black South Africans. The majority of black South Africans still live in townships and informal housing throughout the country, and most work multiple jobs earning very little money, have little access to higher quality schools or health care for themselves and their children, and have few opportunities to move out of the townships. With all this, it is very clear that the expropriation law is well needed to correct the injustice suffered by black Africans since the apartheid era. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel so that you can get more videos like this.